Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going deep into Apple's world, specifically their recent financial performance. We're going to be going behind the scenes of their fiscal year 2024 report. It's kind of like checking out their end-of-year report card,
Yeah,
to see how the business did. I mean, it's always fascinating to get a peek behind the curtain of a company as big as Apple,
it
right?
really is.
Their performance kind of gives us these clues about what's happening, not just in the tech world, but also like in the global economy as a whole.
Yeah, that's right. We're not just looking at numbers here. We're actually getting insights into their strategies and all
Yeah.
those big global forces that are impacting their business.
Exactly. So let's start with the big picture. Apple's total net sales, so basically all the money they brought in from selling their products and services, reached a huge, a massive $94.93 billion this past quarter. That's up from, what was it, $89.498 billion?
Right.
Yeah, $89.498 billion the same time last year. And for the full year, they hit $391.035 billion, an increase from $383.285 billion the previous year.
Steady growth for sure, but the pace is definitely slower compared to some of Apple's, like really high flying years in the past. And I think this raises a really key question. What's causing this shift?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm.
So let's break down those sales by product to see what's actually going on. First up, the iPhone. Apple's tried and true moneymaker. This quarter, iPhone sales generated $46.2222 billion compared to $43.805 billion last year. For the whole year, iPhone sales totaled $201.183 billion, a slight increase from $200.583 billion the previous year.
Yeah, the iPhone is still a powerhouse, but even its growth is showing signs of slowing down.
Okay, interesting. So next, let's look at the Mac. This quarter, Mac sales came in at $7.744 billion, up from $7.614 billion last year. And for the entire year, they hit $29.984 billion, compared to $29.357 the year before.
You know what's really interesting about this?
Is that?
It tells us something about, your tastes as a consumer.
Okay, yeah.
Even in a market where, most PCs are really struggling, you're still drawn to Apple's premium products. It shows that they're really doing something right, and understanding what you and people like you value.
That's a really great point. It seems like Apple's strategy of focusing on these high-end devices is working, at least for now. Now let's talk about the iPad, where things get a bit more complex. This quarter, iPad sales reached $6.950 billion, up from $6.443 billion last year. But for the entire year, iPad revenue actually dipped to $26.694 billion from $28.300 billion the year before.
Yeah, that dip in yearly iPad sales, that definitely needs more investigation. I mean, it could mean that consumer preferences are changing, or maybe there's more competition in the tablet market. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Okay. All right, moving on to wearables, home, and accessories. I know it's a mouthful, but basically it covers things like the Apple Watch and AirPods. This category brought in $9.042 billion this quarter, down just a bit from $9.322 billion last year. Looking at the full year, this segment made $37.05 billion compared to $39.845 billion the year before.
Even with that slight decrease, this category is still bringing in a sizable chunk of Apple's overall revenue.
Yeah.
It shows how popular, just how popular products like the Apple Watch and AirPods have become. They're a big part of Apple's success story.
Okay. Now for the category that's really got everyone buzzing, services. So this is where Apple kind of branches out beyond hardware. Think about things like the App Store, Apple Music, and all those subscription services you might be using. This quarter services generated a whopping $24.972 billion, up from $22.3144 billion last year. And for the full year, services hit an impressive $96.169 billion compared to $85.200 billion last year.
Wow, that's really impressive. This is a clear sign that Apple's strategic move to expand its services is really paying off. And this part of their business, it's growing so fast, and it's becoming a major driver of their overall growth. It also helps balance out any ups and downs they might see in hardware sales.
Yeah, right. So sales are up, though maybe not as dramatically as in the past. But here's the big question. How much profit did Apple actually make from all of this? This is where the story takes a bit of an unexpected turn. Their net income, which is basically like how much money they have left after paying all their expenses, was $14.736 billion for the quarter. That's a pretty significant drop from $22.956 billion the same time last year. And for the entire year, net income came in at $93.736 billion, also down from $96.995 billion last year.
This decline in profitability, both for the quarter and the year, is definitely something to pay attention to. It's not the trend we usually see from Apple, and it suggests there are other things going on beyond just sales figures.
Right. And you know what? There's one big factor in particular that we need to discuss. The European tax situation.
Yeah, buried within these numbers is a really hefty one-time charge, a charge of, get this, $10.2 billion, and it's all related to a European tax case.
Okay, now this sounds interesting. Can you break down what happened? I'm sure our listeners are curious too.
Absolutely. So to understand this, we need to go back a few years. In 2016, the European Commission, they accused Apple of receiving this illegal state aid from Ireland in the form of favorable tax arrangements. Basically, they said that Apple was paying way less in taxes than they should have been.
So they were being accused of not playing by the rules, so to speak.
Exactly. Now, Apple, they fought back against this decision, and they actually won their appeal in 2020. However, that victory was short-lived. In 2024, the European Court of Justice, which is like the Supreme Court for the EU, overturned the previous ruling and sided with the Commission.
So in simple terms, what does this mean for Apple?
It means they had to pay back taxes to Ireland. And that resulted in that massive $10.2 billion charge we see in their financial statements. What this means for you, as a consumer, is that Apple's profits took a big hit. And this is important because lower profits could mean less investment in new products and, new features that you might want in the future.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of change. It really shows you how much power governments have, even over the biggest companies in the world.
Absolutely. This case is like a perfect example of, the complicated relationship between global regulations and how companies handle their finances. It's a high-stakes game.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered sales. We look at how the different products are performing, and we unpack this major tax bill. But what about Apple's overall financial health? Let's shift gears a bit here and dive into their cash flow.
Okay, so despite this whole tax situation, Apple still generated an incredible $118.254 billion in cash from operations this year.
That's a mind-boggling amount of money. What are they doing with all that cash?
Well, they spend a big portion of it, $94.949 billion to be exact, buying back their own stock.
Wait, hold on. Why would they do that?
Buying back stock can actually be a smart move for companies. It reduces the number of shares available, which can increase the value of the remaining shares, and boost their earnings per share. It's a way for companies to, return value to shareholders. Think of it this way. If there are fewer slices of apple pie available, your slice suddenly becomes more valuable, right? And since you, as someone potentially interested in Apple products, could also be a shareholder, this could benefit you directly.
Interesting. So it's like they're investing in themselves in a way. And speaking of returning value to shareholders, Apple also paid out $15.234 billion in dividends this year.
Right. Dividends are those payments companies make to their shareholders, essentially sharing some of their profits. It's another way Apple is rewarding investors.
So it sounds like even with that European tax bill, Apple is still in a very strong financial position.
They are. That ability to generate so much cash gives them a lot of flexibility. They can invest in research and development, buy other companies, or continue returning value to shareholders. It's a good position to be in.
Definitely. So we've covered a lot of ground here already. We looked at which Apple products are doing well. We peeked into their services strategy, and we even got like a little crash course in international tax law.
Yeah. It's crazy how one legal case can have such a massive impact on a company's bottom line. I think it really highlights just how interconnected business and global affairs really are.
Absolutely. It underscores why it's so important to understand, not just the numbers themselves, but also like the bigger picture of what's happening in the world and how it all ties together.
You got it. We can't look at a company like Apple in isolation. We need to consider the global context, the regulatory landscape, and all the competitive forces that are shaping their industry.
So with all this in mind, what does it mean for Apple's future? They're clearly a major player in the tech world, but there are some, potential challenges on the horizon, right?
Yes, there are. The slowing growth of iPhone sales, the ups and downs in the iPad market, and the constantly changing world of regulations are all things Apple needs to navigate very carefully.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to see how they adapt and continue to innovate to stay on top. Will they go all in on services? Will we see like a groundbreaking new product category that changes the game?
Those are great questions. And there's another really important factor to consider: the growing competition from other tech giants.
Right. It's not just about Apple anymore.
Okay.
Companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they're all competing for dominance, especially in areas like cloud computing and artificial intelligence.
It's a dynamic and constantly evolving landscape, and Apple can't just rest on its laurels. They need to keep pushing the boundaries and staying ahead of the curve. This shift towards services is something to keep an eye on because it could change how you interact with Apple in the future. It's less about owning devices and more about subscribing to their whole ecosystem.
That's interesting. Well, I, for one, am excited to see what they come up with next. This deep dive has given us, I think, a much richer understanding of Apple's financial performance. But it's also raised some, intriguing questions about the company's strategic direction
Yeah.
and what's in store for the tech industry as a whole.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives. We start with a set of numbers, but we end up with this deeper understanding of how complex and interconnected the world around us really is.
Absolutely. So to our listener out there, as you're checking out the next Apple product launch or hearing about their latest earnings report, remember there's a whole world of financial moves, legal battles, and competitive pressures happening behind the scenes. And that's really where the real story unfolds.